Okay, my name is Lawrence McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Flora Cardoni of Penn Environment. Vanessa Maria Graber will preview the new Paisao Boricua, APM's bold reimagining of the Germantown corridor, and Lance Haver will walk us through the recently filed lawsuit calling on SEPTA to reverse their recent cuts. So before we get to Lance, because we're a news show and we are transparent in everything we do, I have a statement that I'm going to read first before we bring Lance on. One of our cooperative members, because Hall Monitor is a worker-owned cooperative, consumer reporter Lance Haver, is a plaintiff in a lawsuit against SEP for implementing their recent service cuts. He is doing so as a private citizen and not as a representative of Philadelphia Hall Monitor. The Philadelphia Hall Monitor is not at all affiliated with the lawsuit and remains an independent, nonpartisan media outlet. Lance was asked to be a plaintiff in the lawsuit against SEPTA because of his background as a consumer advocate and because he's been involved in previous proceedings against SEPTA. While the lawsuit is pending, he is no longer going to be reporting on SEPTA for the Hall Monitor, but he'll continue reporting on other issues. From now on, when Lance is featured on the show to talk about SEPTA and the lawsuit, we'll be speaking to him as a guest, acting as a private citizen independent of our news organization. To learn more information about this story, you might also see him being interviewed on other news outlets who are covering the story about the SEPTA lawsuit. His comments and opinions regarding the lawsuit are his own and in no way representative of this news organization. The Philadelphia Hall Monitor maintains its editorial independence and will continue to provide accurate, fact-based reporting on all civic issues. If you have any questions or concerns you would like to share with us, we invite you to email us or DM us on social media. All right, so with that out of the way, now we're going to bring on Lance Haver to tell us a little bit about this lawsuit. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. Angry as usual, not a surprise. And I would like to explain to our viewers how I ended up as a plaintiff and why I'm no longer serving as Hall Monitor's reporter on SEPTA issues. So there's a few things to understand. First is when I served as a consumer advocate for the city of Philadelphia, I was a plaintiff in a number of SEPTA suits to preserve the transfers. At one point, SEPTA wanted to do away with the transfers. When I was the consumer advocate for the city, the mayor, myself sued to preserve the transfers. As a result of that, I have a wealth of information. In addition, I have contacts with a number of attorneys who have successfully sued SEPTA in the past. The second is I have attended all the board meetings and all of the hearings. And during those hearings, I was the only one who demanded that SEPTA follow the law and answer questions, because the law is very clear. The SEPTA was to allow reasonable questions and provide answers to reasonable questions. Now that SEPTA has decided not to wait for the state budget to be passed and to eliminate the bus launch, 3,000 stops, 32 buses, because they say they'll save $5 million, even though their rate stabilization fund has grown from $350 million in the May hearings to $396 million at the July board. Even though they have this money, they're saying they still have to make the cuts because they don't want to wait for the state budget. So I was approached by one of my former lawyers who said, would I agree to be a plaintiff in this current suit? And I did agree, one, because I am very angry that riders have to be hurt for no reason. The riders are really being used. They're pawns in SEPTA's game to try and put pressure on the state legislature. Poor and working people should not be cannon fodder. We should not suffer. We should not be pawns for somebody else's power structure. But the other reason that I decided to do it is I have what's called standing. And for viewers who are familiar with this, that we no surprise. But SEPTA could easily say, nobody else showed up and asked questions. Nobody asked about these things. So the appeal of their decision, whoever's appealing it, doesn't have standing to do so. Well, because I'm the only one who stood up and said, I want answers to the questions, and I was once arrested in handcuffs and a second time physically removed for asking these questions, there is no doubt that I was there raising these questions beforehand. We have showed on hall monitor my being removed. I attended the board meetings and I asked these questions. There is no doubt that I have been there asking these questions on behalf of hall monitor and on behalf of our viewers. So when the question came up, would I agree to be a plaintiff? Um, I recognized how hard it might be to find somebody who has my background, who has my understanding, but also was there asking these questions and could not be told, well, you missed your opportunity to object, because I did object. And as a result, I cannot be thrown out of the proceedings in the same way that somebody who didn't participate and may be harmed by the cuts could now try and raise the issue. The question would be, well, when they were discussing this, where were you? And the answer is, for me, when they were discussing this, where was I? I was trying to get more information so I'd be able to testify. I do know that there are some of my friends who have suggested that it's a mistake, and I accept that. I recognize that I am working with people who I have now historically have not worked with before, and there are issues that I disagree with my attorney on, but I am very thankful that he has agreed to stand up to all the pressure from the governor and the Democratic legislature and the Philadelphia delegation, who is supporting the cuts. You know, I would much prefer if the mayor and the council president were leading the fights to rescind the cuts. I would feel much more comfortable. It would be much easier for me, and then I wouldn't be in this position. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening. You have all of these progressive leaders saying the cuts are horrible, they're awful, they're really harming the city of Philadelphia, but they're not willing to call on SEPTA to rescind the cuts. They're not willing to stand up and say, SEPTA, you have $396 million in the bank. These cuts only save $5 million a month. Why are you doing this? And because they're silent, because State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta was quoted at the Eagles game saying, when working people at the Eagles game have to pay $60 for an Uber ride, they should blame the Republicans. Somehow he missed the point. While the Republicans should and must fund public transit in the long term, there are two distinct problems. The first is the short term. What does SEPTA do while it's waiting for the budget to be passed? SEPTA decided to cut the bus routes. SEPTA decided to make everyone wait. Not a single legislator in Harrisburg, Democrat or Republican, voted for these cuts in service. SEPTA did this. SEPTA decided not to wait. And just so people understand how much the SEPTA management and SEPTA's board are using the people of Philadelphia, consider this. They didn't wait till after Labor Day to make the cuts. They made the cuts on the first day our students went back to school, making sure there would be chaos. If they had waited and given the schools a chance to hand out flyers to the students so the parents would know what buses were cut, what the alternatives were, how to get to school, that would have been one thing. But SEPTA's management didn't want that. They wanted the chaos. They wanted to make people suffer. They believed that they could use their public relations team to point to the Republicans and say, see, this is what they're doing to you. And again, the Republicans have a responsibility to solve the long-term problem. But the short-term problem has been completely created by SEPTA. SEPTA does not have a cash problem today. They don't have to do this. They have almost $400 million in the bank, and they are refusing to wait for the governor, the Republicans in the Senate, the Democrats in the House to pass the budget. The budget will be passed. In fact, 2 days ago, the governor said he wasn't going to go along with the Republicans' request to use the state money. Yesterday, the governor said he would go along with it. And today, the leaders in the state house said they would go along with it. So we're within hours, maybe days, but more like hours of a settlement. And yet SEPTA refuses to put the buses back in service and continues to punish people, make people wait, make people get on crowded buses. Now, I know that some of our viewers know that this is what I've been doing for most of my life. So I have a number of people who are very kind to me, have been following me. I got a very distressing email from somebody that I've known forever, and she said, my bus is still operating, but it's so crowded now, and at my age, I'm now wearing a mask because I am scared for my health.
Yeah.
And, I don't feel comfortable telling people, well, you don't have to worry about COVID again. I certainly don't hold myself out as any expert for any of that. But when people start emailing me their personal stories, I feel for them. People can't get to doctor's appointments. People saying, look, I'm afraid to be on a jam bus because my understanding of COVID is the more people are surrounding me, the more likely I am to get it. And SEPTA apparently has a cold heart to all of this and would rather make people suffer so that they can use them in their fight. Rather than SEPTA explaining to the state legislator, it's not just SEPTA, it's every public transit system in the state, not explaining all the reasons why they should fund it, wants to use the riders as pawns in their attempt to get the Republicans to do what they want. And that's why I agreed to the suit. I recognize it's a little awkward for the other members of Hall Monitor. I recognize that it's somewhat confusing for our viewers and our readers, and I do apologize for that. I really do. But here was my choice: stand by and do nothing and watch people continue to suffer, or get out on a limb and fight as best I can for the people who are riding SEPTA, who are working, the working poor, the people who need SEPTA to get to church, synagogue, mosque, doctor's appointments, work, visit friends, all of those. And I made a decision, as uncomfortable as it may be for some of the people who have historically supported me, I made a decision to work with people who historically I've disagreed with and fight like hell for the riders.
Well, and Lance, one of the things that, and you said, you know, we're calling on elected officials to do something. So when you saw the chance to do something, you said, "All right, I'll try."
Right.
I mean, you're only doing what you ask other people to do.
Right. But I do recognize it's uncomfortable. Most people who are reporters rarely do what I'm doing, and I recognize I am stretching it. And again, the choice for me, the other choice was worse. And unfortunately, sometimes we choose between bad and worse. This is a
Yeah.
bad choice. The other choice, to sit by and watch people suffer, was worse for me. And
Mhm.
I accept that people will be mad at me. I don't begrudge that. People can have differences of opinion. People can think I'm making a mistake. I just want them to understand that I'm aware of that, but I could not, in my heart, sit by and watch this happen without doing whatever I could to stop it. The lawsuit is very simple. The lawsuit says SEPTA has enough money now. They don't have to make the cuts. SEPTA says they have to make the cuts. That's just not true. SEPTA says they have to have a balanced budget. But understand, this is not unusual for SEPTA's budget to be passed before the state budget. In every other year, and I've been participating in SEPTA budget proceedings and fare hikes since 1980. So that tells you why my hair is receding and my beard is gray. Every other year, SEPTA management has projected being successful in their lobbying efforts to get the additional money they need from Harrisburg. This is the first year in my personal experience over all those years that the SEPTA general managers stood in front of the public and said, we expect to fail. We, SEPTA, are doing such a poor job of explaining ourselves that we don't believe that we'll be able to persuade the state legislature to give us the additional money we need. The general manager is saying we can't pass a budget based on hope. Every other year, every other general manager passed a budget based on an expectation that they would be successful. This general manager has decided to pass a budget based on his projected failure. He projects that he will fail to make his argument, fail to persuade anyone, and that is why he is making the riders suffer. He says, I am a failure to get the money, and therefore, because I have failed, you will suffer. And that's intolerable.
Now, there is some precedent for lawsuits of this type to be successful.
Yeah,
There was a case. Yeah.
no, we've won in the past. Again,
Mhm.
I don't it seems a little, I want to be humble here. I've been fortunate enough to have great representation in the past. And in the past, we have won time and time again. We have succeeded in stopping the doomsday budgets. We've succeeded in getting funding. And if SEPTA were actually honest, they would look at the past and they would go, how did you do it in the past? And they would recreate that. One of the things that I continue to point out that's infuriating is there are 40 public transit systems in the state of Pennsylvania. 39 of them are waiting for the state budget to be passed. 39 of them are going to Harrisburg as a group and saying we need money. Only SEPTA is saying they can't wait and they're going alone. If you think about it, the rural legislators run against the city of Philadelphia. If SEPTA really wanted to put together a coalition to win, wouldn't they have all the other public transit systems from across the state at the press conference? Wouldn't they bring Lancaster and Allentown and Wilkes-Barre and Scranton and Erie and Pittsburgh and Dauphin County and Lehigh County? All of these other systems have similar problems, but SEPTA doesn't bring them into the coalition. Instead, SEPTA says we're going to try and use the riders as pawns to win, rather than do the hard work of organizing all the other public transit systems, bringing everyone together for a common denominator and a common solution. They say we're just going to project failure, punish the riders, and hope the riders scream so loud that somebody's going to care. And the people they expect to care are the people who voted to cut SNAP and voted to cut Medicaid.
Right.
It's a strange strategy.
Right. So lawsuit's been filed. What happens next? What is likely to occur here?
Well, the first thing that happened is when we announced the lawsuit, the governor changed his position on the flex money. When we filed it today, the second thing that happened is the Democratic leadership in the state house changed their opinion and agreed with the Republicans. So I'm hoping between now and tomorrow morning, the SEPTA is going to get a call from the governor saying, don't stop the cuts, or maybe the mayor, or maybe the city council president. There is no question the governor is saying we're close to a deal. We're close to a deal. There's general agreement now, not specifics, not done. May take a couple days, may take a couple weeks, but there's general agreement. There's absolutely no reason for SEPTA not to put the bus service back in effect. So we say that it's not within their discretion to behave like this. We say they violated the state law when they refused to answer questions at the hearings. We say they violate the state law because of the people who are losing bus service. The overwhelming majority are poor people of color. The train lines are important and we should fight to keep them running. But the people who ride the trains tend to be more affluent. And the only thing that's happening to the train lines is they're not going to have quite as many trains. For the inner city bus riders, their lines are disappearing. 32 bus lines are disappearing. Another 40 lines are getting shorter. So, for example, the bus called the 27, which brings kids from Roxborough and Mattiong down to the High School for the Creative Performing Arts. SEPTA has shortened that, so those kids can't get to school anymore. But there's no equivalent of that on the regional rail line. So this is really a racial attack on poor people of color. And the greatest savings comes from the train lines because SEPTA pays so much to rent the tracks from Amtrak that cutting the buses doesn't really save very much at all. And I recognize if I had $5 million, or Larry, you had $5 million, we'd be well off. But SEPTA's annual operating budget is $1.6 billion. $5 million a month to them when they have $400 million in the bank is nothing. It's not even couch change. It's less than that. So, you know, that famous example, if you can find 50 cents in your couch, how much does Bill Gates find in his?
Right.
Well, SEPTA would find more than $5 million a month in its couch if it looked, but it refuses to look. So that's the basis. Now, there is a bigger thing, and that is it constitutional for the SEPTA legislation to give so much power to SEPTA? The general manager has said he's dismantling the system. With these cuts, he's dismantling the system. Now, does the general manager of SEPTA have the legal right to dismantle public transit in the Delaware Valley? Now, I think he's lying when he says that. I don't think he's being honest when he says that. I think it's just a scare tactic. But assuming for the sake of argument that he's telling the truth, that he's dismantling the system, does he have the legal right to make the decision? The state legislature set it up. Does one man, the general manager of SEPTA, get to override state government and the governor and all the people in the Delaware Valley and decide to close SEPTA? He seems to think he can. We're going to court and we're saying he doesn't have that legal right. He does not have complete discretion over what he does. And if he doesn't have complete discretion over what he does, he has no right to mislead the public. He has no right to lie about SEPTA's financial condition. And the cuts should be rescinded. One final point, and then I'll see if there's any more. Again, every year SEPTA passes a budget with projections. Every year that SEPTA's had financial difficulties, they've projected they'll be able to lobby successfully and get their hole, their deficit, solved by the state legislature. This is the first general manager and the first SEPTA board that has projected failing. Now, why aren't they being held accountable? No matter how mad people are at the Republicans, they should look at the truth. The Republican legislature did not vote to make these cuts. The Republican legislature did not order these cuts made. The SEPTA general manager and the democratically controlled SEPTA board voted to make these cuts. Those are the people who are taking the rides away from riders. Yes, Harrisburg has a role to play, but until they pass that budget, there's absolutely no reason for SEPTA to have done this.
All right. So Lance, just to be clear, you're going to still be doing what you do here on the show. It's just going to be regarding SEPTA. So,
right. Next week, I'll be reporting about the water rate increase. Everybody, unfortunately, in September is going to see their water rates go up. I want to talk again about health insurance and what's going to happen with that. Talk a little bit about what the cuts in SNAP are going to mean for supermarkets. And if you're in a marginal neighborhood, there's a good chance your supermarket is going to close, because that supermarket, even if you're not a SNAP recipient, you are at risk of losing your supermarket. And what that means, unfortunately, is you're going to have to travel further, or you're going to have a worse quality produce, or not even be able to buy produce. I know people sometimes shop at places like 7-Elevens, but you can't, it's very difficult, next to impossible, to get healthy food. And of course, that just drives up our issues around health. So I do thank all our viewers, and I hope they accept my apology for being in this position. And just, I hope they understand, I made a decision. I understand not everyone agrees, but I made a decision to do whatever I could to help our riders and help our city.
All right, Lance, thank you so much. And we will see you again next week on one of those other really important topics. There's a lot going on, a lot to talk about, and we're going to be doing it. So thank you so much, Lance. All right, now I'd like to bring on Vanessa Maria Graber and Denise Clay Murray onto the show. Hi, Denise. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. Vanessa's not back yet, so we're going to call an audible here, Denise.
Always.
Yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, it's hard to keep track anymore, you and I spoke to Flora Cardoni of Penn Environment.
Yes.
About, specifically about PGW and some of the rates and other things dealing with energy production here in Pennsylvania. So now we're going to play that interview with Flora Cardoni of Penn Environment. All right, Flora Cardoni, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about Penn Environment and the work you do?
Absolutely. So Penn Environment is a statewide citizen-based environmental advocacy nonprofit. So we work across the state to make sure everyone has clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, protected public lands and wild places to enjoy, and a safe and livable climate to call home, powered by clean renewable energy.
So we'll talk a little bit about some of the work you had done last week. But before we get to that, as an Irish person from Pennsylvania, my ancestors were coal miners. Can you tell us a little bit about gas and coal production here in Pennsylvania and the drawbacks of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of folks share your story. Pennsylvania has a long history of being a leader in energy production. First oil, then coal, now majority fracked gas. Our energy mix in Pennsylvania right now is about 60% fracked or natural gas. And that how we power our lives, unfortunately, has a lot of negative impacts on our environment and our health and our future. So coal, oil, fracked gas, our fossil fuels, especially, PGW, our gas utility, the action last week was focused on them. Fracked gas, when we're at our drill sites, our wells in communities across Pennsylvania, the process of fracking is releasing harmful air pollution that makes people sick, harmful water pollution, threatening our health, causing things like respiratory illness and even cancer. It also releases methane pollution, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas that actually has about 80 times the warming potential of carbon dioxide over a 20-year period, and is contributing to climate change and the destabilization that we see all around us. Then we burn it inside our homes, like when we're cooking on our gas stove, and it releases indoor air pollution that threatens our health even further. Plus, it can be a safety risk. Unfortunately, we saw just a couple months ago a gas explosion in Nicetown. There's a pretty publicized gas explosion in South Philadelphia a couple weeks ago. And so at Penn Environment, we're really focused on moving away from those dirty, dangerous, and climate warming, sources of energy towards a future where we can power our lives with clean, renewable energy. For example, energy from the sun that's abundant, it never runs out, it shows up for free, and we can power our lives without polluting our air, hurting our health, or contributing to climate change. And that's really the future that we want to build, is one that's cleaner and greener, where people have safer, cleaner, more affordable energy powering their lives.
So tell us a little bit about the action you took yesterday, last week outside of Philadelphia City Hall.
Yeah, so last week, Penn Environment stood with a coalition of groups who I want to shout out first off: PennPIRG, Power Interfaith, Sierra Club Pennsylvania, Physicians for Social Responsibility Pennsylvania, Clean Air Council, and Vote Solar. Together with some other parties in the case, we all intervened in a proposed rate hike that PGW is pursuing. And last week, we announced a proposed settlement that we reached with the other parties and with Philadelphia's gas utility, PGW. So we are announcing that proposed settlement, what we've agreed to, what it means for consumers and our planet, as well as talking about the steps that still remain to make sure that Philadelphians have safe, clean, affordable energy.
And what were some of the results of that settlement? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so the settlement was a big win for consumers. That's where a lot of the wins came in. So through our proposed settlement, PGW is bringing down its originally proposed rate increase from $105 million a year to $62 million. Still an increase, but a reduction of more than 40%, which is certainly a win for ratepayers. PGW had also proposed something called a revenue guarantee, where they would have guaranteed their own revenue by charging customers more as people use less gas. And using less gas is a good thing for our health, for our environment, for our climate. And increasingly, Philadelphians are getting off gas, either electrifying their appliances, getting a heat pump, an induction stove. So the demand for gas is decreasing. And instead of, changing their business model, thinking about how to meet the demands for the 21st century, PGW is proposing just to charge everyone more to guarantee their own revenue, which we thought was a Band-Aid, number one, and didn't get to the real issue of, planning for the future, and at the same time would mean customers paying more. And the proposed settlement means that they're totally dropping that plan, which is a big win. The agreement also places limits on a surcharge that PGW often uses to charge customers for energy that they don't use. So when the weather is warmer in Philadelphia, as it's going to continue to be thanks to climate change, Philadelphians use less gas to heat their homes. PGW had a charge in there to charge people more money to kind of, again, make up their own revenue as people use less gas. This places limits on their ability to do that, and they've agreed to revisit how they calculate what normal weather is as, our climate continues to change. And then there's a few big wins around protections for low-income ratepayers specifically. And I want to shout out some of the other parties in the case: Turn and Cause PA, which were represented in the case by Community Legal Services. They did a lot of advocacy around these provisions in particular. They were able to secure more funding for PGW's low-income customers to use less gas and conserve more instead, through energy efficiency and weatherization. And it included reforms to improve PGW's discount program for low-income ratepayers, which will help reduce bills. So those were kind of all the big consumer wins, which were certainly wins. And then something else we were excited about is that PGW agreed to the first ever kind of public meetings where the general public can comment on their long-term greenhouse gas reduction strategies, which again is the really critical thing. This is all one step forward. We have some protections for ratepayers. We have an agreement to these community meetings. But we were saying last week, and I want to iterate now, that this is just one step. We have a lot more work to do to encourage PGW to really we have a lot more work to do to really encourage PGW to plan for the future, in a future that meets the city's climate pollution reduction goals, that makes sure that we're not warming our planet, hurting our health, and threatening our safety just to power our homes, and where Philadelphians do have greener, cleaner, safer, more affordable energy powering their lives. So the fight continues as well.
Do you find that there's an appetite across the Commonwealth to start moving towards more renewable energy? Or do we have these huge natural gas and oil and coal lobbies saying, well, that stuff's not going to work?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little bit of both in the Commonwealth here. On one hand, you do have very powerful fossil fuel lobbyists. You even have PGW paying for pro-gas lobbyists. And certainly we see that across the Commonwealth. There's a lot of lobbyists that represent the fracking industry, the oil and gas industry in Harrisburg all the time, contributing to campaigns and lobbying our elected officials day to day. And unfortunately, the environmental community does not have the money that the fossil fuel industry has to have all those lobbyists in Harrisburg and donating to those campaigns. But what we do have is people. And the majority of Pennsylvanians, polling shows, do want us to embrace more clean, renewable energy, do want us to do something to tackle climate change, and are supportive of policies that would help increase clean, renewable energy in the Commonwealth. We have seen growth in clean energy across the Commonwealth in the last few years. Individuals embracing going solar or getting electric vehicles or induction stoves to get off gas, schools and houses of worship and nonprofits going solar. But unfortunately, our laws in Pennsylvania right now are still set up to favor the fossil fuel industry. So as it stands today, as I mentioned, about 60% of our energy in Pennsylvania right now comes from gas, and only about 4% comes from clean renewable energy. So even though I would say the majority of Pennsylvanians are supportive of more clean energy, we need our elected officials in Harrisburg to really embrace these solutions and pass policies that do make it easier and more affordable for utilities and for everyday people, businesses, nonprofits to embrace clean energy too.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Home Monitor.
Hi, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I guess my question is because I look at a lot of this stuff from both a local and national perspective. In terms of the environment and in terms of the work you all do, Pennsylvania was already going to be a tough nut to crack because, as you know, James Carville said, there's Philadelphia, there's Pittsburgh, and there's Alabama in between. Has that job gotten harder under the current climate? Do you find yourself having to do more education? And what form does that take?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's gotten harder in some ways because at the federal level, we're currently seeing a rollback of some of the programs that did make it easier for folks to embrace clean energy. So for the past several years, Pennsylvanians have been taking advantage of tax credits and incentives for clean renewable energy, as well as I mentioned, businesses, nonprofits, houses of worship who are able to get back 30% of the cost of going solar. I do want to mention that solar energy, clean renewable energy, is actually cheaper today than fossil fuels. And you do end up saving money in the long run because of reduced utility bills, but the upfront cost of an array is still a barrier for folks. So those tax credits are really critical. And those getting rolled back at the federal level is certainly a setback in terms of individual folks making the right decision or, decisions to help the planet and their wallets at the same time. I also think there's a challenge just in increased polarization at every level of government, where you do have a seeming, reticence to work together in Harrisburg, even though there's policies that have bipartisan support that would help people, the environment, ratepayers. For example, authorizing community energy to help people, embrace solutions like community solar. Um, we have bills passing the state house with a lot of bipartisan support that just don't go anywhere in the Senate because there's kind of a spirit of not wanting to work together that's playing out in our public transit fight right now as well. And I do think that polarization at the federal level is making that worse. On the other hand, I've been doing this work in Pennsylvania now about 8 years, so not too long, but I've been around a little while, a couple administrations, and I do continue to see more and more people who understand that the impacts of climate change are here, who understand that clean, renewable energy can help clean up our air, protect our health, save them money, and protect our planet at the same time. And so I do think that, in terms of the public awareness, things continue to move in the right direction. And that gives me some confidence and hope that we can continue educating folks and organizing folks and pushing the politics forward to a place where this all can get done.
Now, you mentioned that in terms of the public still gets it. What can the public do to make it so the people who we send to Harrisburg get it?
Yeah, I always say people just need to be contacting your elected officials way more often. Their job is to listen to you. So I encourage folks to call their elected officials at every level of government, city, state, federal, if you're in a Collier county level as well, and let them know that you care about these issues. You don't have to be an expert in policies to make your voice heard. You can call, introduce yourself with your name, where you live, share one sentence, one reason that you care about climate change or air pollution, and ask your elected officials to prioritize clean, renewable energy. You don't need to know a specific bill number. You can keep it broad like that. And certainly if you follow groups like Penn Environment and others, we can let you know about bills and you can be a little more specific. But I want people to know, like, it's elected officials' jobs to listen to you. You should call their offices way more often, and you don't have to be the expert to express why you care. You should pick up the phone and call. And if you're nervous to call, you can call after hours and leave a voicemail. Or you can, write a letter, send an email, but certainly more people making your voices heard, the better. And if you're here in Philadelphia, where many of our elected officials are good on the environment and care about clean energy, I would say if you know people who live in other parts of the state, or even in Northeast Philly and other parts of the state, where their elected officials might not be on board, encouraging those friends and family members to call their elected officials is really important too.
Now, you said that there were some things that were a little cost prohibitive on the front end for people to be able to do in terms of the environment. What are some things that don't cost as much that are just like simple things that people can do every day that don't require a big investment?
Yes. Thank you for asking. One, call your elected officials. But yes, the main thing I think there is embracing energy efficiency, energy conservation, and weatherization, because the cleanest and cheapest energy is the energy that we don't use in the first place. So there's simple things folks can do that we've been taught to do. Many of us, in our lives, turn off the lights when you leave the room, unplug, appliances when you're not using them. But also things like, caulking your windows or making sure you're, have insulation so you're not wasting heat or wasting cool. Utilities like PECO will come do a home energy efficiency audit for you so they can find those gaps and where energy is escaping. But certainly those are big ones. You can wash your water, wash your clothes with cold water and air dry them instead of using your dryer. Get more efficient light bulbs, and when it is time to buy a new appliance or get a new light bulb, consider more efficient versions that use less energy. All of those things will help you save money because you're not using as much energy, but it can also help our environment at the same time because that reduces energy production and pollution.
It also reduces cost, which is why I say to my husband all the time when he leaves the room and there's lights literally on all over the house, please turn off the lights because we can't afford this.
Exactly. And especially as utility bills continue to rise, which unfortunately is going to keep happening in the Commonwealth. That's part of the reason we want the Commonwealth to invest in more clean, renewable energy, which is cheaper to build and faster to come online. But certainly, as we continue to feel the strain on our wallets, those energy efficiency tips at home are really critical.
Okay, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, our co-host, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Flora, before we let you go, how can people learn more about Penn Environment?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. You can certainly visit us at pennenvironment.org, and we're at Penn Environment, one word, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So I think those are the main ways to go to get updates. And then I also just want to plug too, we have a mobile action network at Penn Environment. I personally send the texts myself a couple times a month, not too often, with an action or event invitation, call your state rep about this thing, etc. And if you're listening, you can join that mobile action network by texting the word Penn Environment, PENN Environment, to the number 484-229-0050. That's 484-229-0050. Follow the prompts so that we can connect you with your correct, elected official for actions. But I'll send a couple texts, and that's an easy way to email your elected official or come to an event and get involved.
All right. Flora Cardoni, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. We'd like to thank Flora Cardoni for joining us in the program. And now, Denise, we'd like to bring on Vanessa Maria Graber. There we go. Oh, she was there. Now she's back. Okay. Vanessa, how are you tonight?
Hey, I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Good. Now, Vanessa, before we get into it, I just want to ask you, how bad was my pronunciation of Paseo Boricua?
That's pretty good, actually. So, good job.
Thank you. So, tell us a little bit about where you were over the weekend and what you saw.
Yeah, I actually was there last Thursday. As you know, as part of Hall Monitor, we get invited to all sorts of community events. And this was one last look at the Diamond Theater, which they have renamed the Teatro Puerto Rico. And this is in the North Philadelphia Germantown section. It is in an area that's called Hartranft. It's kind of adjacent to Old Kensington, Fishtown area near Temple University. And the Asociación de Puertorriqueños en Marcha, which is also called APM, they're a nonprofit organization that does a lot of development work in the community. They are renovating the theater and restoring it and hopefully making it a cultural landmark here in North Philadelphia. And they also unveiled the preliminary master plan for Paseo Boricua, and that's APM's bold reimagining of Germantown Avenue as a thriving corridor celebrating Puerto Rican culture, commerce, and community pride. And so for the last couple of weeks, I've been doing a lot of research on housing and affordable housing. It's an issue that I think is becoming more pervasive in the neighborhood. And I came across a study from a group of researchers in Chicago who studied older Puerto Ricans who were living in a gentrified neighborhood. And what they found was that even though people were able to stay in their homes, they felt that the neighborhood was still very unwelcoming. And so this study tried to understand what are the elements about a neighborhood that makes it welcoming? So it's important not to just prevent people from getting displaced when gentrification happens, but it's also important to preserve the culture of the neighborhood so the longtime residents feel welcomed. And so I was curious how APM was addressing this issue of gentrification that's happening in Philadelphia, and how restoring a theater and also reimagining the business corridor and celebrating Puerto Rican culture can make many of the residents here feel more welcomed. And so I have a little video of the event. And so why don't we check it out? And again, this is from the Teatro Puerto Rico and the unveiling of the plans for Paseo Boricua in North Philadelphia.
Hey, I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and I'm in North Philadelphia at the site of Teatro Puerto Rico, formerly the Diamond Theater. Today, Asociación de Puertorriqueños en Marcha announced their vision and plans to renovate and restore the theater to its former glory, and also to add many great community features to this corridor here on Germantown Avenue. Behind me is the family of the original theater owners. Today, we learned a little bit about theater's history and the vision for the future of not just the theater, but this neighborhood.
And we're all here, I think, because we all believe that Teatro Puerto Rico matters. This culture matters. And it matters for so many reasons. It matters for culture. This stage is where our stories are told in our own voices, Boricua, Latino, and the beautiful mix that is Philadelphia. It matters for the kids. When our children see themselves in the spotlight, they learn what is possible. A restored teatro will be more than a performance hall. It will be a learning space, after-school arts, a technical theater training, digital media, and mentorship, so young people can build confidence, skills, and careers. It matters for commerce. The arts drive economies. A thriving teatro means foot traffic for the surrounding businesses, jobs during construction and beyond, and a new reason for visitors to discover our corridor. And it matters for community. Spaces like this knit our community together. They reduce isolation, they create safer blocks, it turns pride into progress, and when we invest in a landmark, we invest in the people around it. APM has spent 55 years replacing despair with practical hope, and building a time and building hope, one building at a time, one child at a time, one family at a time. We've proven that culturally rooted, physically disciplined projects can transform neighborhoods without leaving anyone behind. Teatro Puerto Rico is our next chapter, and it is a chapter we can only write together. To give you a little bit more background, I'd like to invite Andy to come up and tell us what moved him to certify this as a historical site.
Hi everybody, I'm Andy Moholtz. I'm a musician and organizer from Philadelphia. I've lived in Kensington for 15 years. And yeah, I don't know, I've been a long admirer of this building and of cinema palaces in general. There's a rich history of cinema palaces in Philadelphia that unfortunately most of which are abandoned or have been destroyed. But this particular building is just so beautiful, and when then researching the history of it, I just really thought it needed to be preserved. And you know, Philadelphia purports itself to be a city of history. That's like the entire identity of this city. But then when it comes to saving things that matter to the community and to the people of Philadelphia, sometimes it seems like nobody cares and that they'd rather let it all get turned into yet another series of condo buildings. So I'm just really happy to hear everybody's stories and to hear that, people sharing about the history of this place, because obviously I didn't get to see it. I'm from Philadelphia, but I've only been living around here for 15 years, and I didn't get to see it while it was a theater or while it was in use. So I'm just really excited to hear you talk about what it might turn into, and that it's going to have use for the community, that people are really excited about it. That's really heartening. So thanks for inviting me to be here, and it's my honor and privilege to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah.
Then if we go and look at the avenue, the theater is in the middle of this area, and it's going to be the main seed that's going to begin to create the transformation in here. But also, APM has bought 611 Susquehanna Street, which is an old building that at one point was a hardware store and a market, and transformed that into a venue for food and entertainment, but mostly food and culinary. And then also do some investments on the Cossins building that also began to have what used to be a food desert, other elements in the community to bring in their food trucks and carts. So Paseo Boricua, which is the name that Nilda had attached to it, really is looking to, through the theater, re-energize all of it.
All right, well, there you have it. A bit of good news for once. We're always hearing of historic buildings getting torn down, of divestment and gentrification. And I think it's nice to see examples of what reinvestment and some positive development could look like. And also the importance of the arts, right? And how the arts and culture can make people feel welcome and can add a real economic injection into a neighborhood. And so we often are very critical here on Hall Mater of a lot of the policies that we're reporting on. And so it's actually nice to see the flip side of that, right? What happens when we have good ideas, when we have things that are accessible and meaningful for a community.
And you know, we were talking before the show about how many old theaters there are throughout the city. In my neighborhood, there's a couple on corners, and I don't think they're used as theaters anymore. They've gone on other uses, but they're all over the place.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Philadelphia, you know, is really segregated in the way that we have our neighborhoods, and each neighborhood has its business corridor. And for many neighborhoods, they had their very own local community theater. When I was growing up in the Northeast, we went to Mayfair, And there was the Devon Theater. It was a second run theater. They had $2 movies. And many of these theaters were affordable to families and people in the neighborhood. Now you go to a movie theater, you're easily spending anywhere from $50 to $100 for a family. And my understanding is the Diamond Theater not just played movies, but they also had singers and performers and comedians. They even had wrestling matches in there. And so at the event, people told lots of stories that were really nostalgic of the time when they, came onto Germantown Avenue and were able to go not just to the theater, but many other businesses that no longer exist. And we see remnants of that all over Philadelphia. A lot of these theaters are closed. And as Andy mentioned, some of them are, turned into condos and other places that many Philadelphians, especially working class people, can't access. So again, it's nice to see the restoration of something historic. It's now listed on one of Philadelphia's historic sites. But I'm really excited, as a Puerto Rican woman and someone who lives in the neighborhood, to imagine what that corridor could look like with more businesses, more food vendors, with art and paint. It really could be something that is an attraction for not just people from the city, but visitors to Philadelphia.
Like in terms of the theaters, like the older theaters, probably the one that I've written about the most personally is the Uptown Theater. And depending on who you talk to, either it's almost ready to be opened or it's still, trying to find its footing. And I'm hoping that someday we're able to tell the story of that success the way we're able to tell the story of this one, because some of the early days of hip hop happened at the Uptown Theater, and you also had people like the late Georgie Woods and folks like that. The Supremes performed there, and the Jackson 5 performed there. So it would be nice to see that actually get restored instead of taken over, like it's almost been taken over a couple of times. So hopefully we'll be able to tell that story at some point.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the questions I asked. I asked what the timeline was for this project. And I said, because, I remember when they had an event for the Uptown Theaters, capital campaign and restoration. And, our friends over at WJYN, the John Radio, are over there as well. And it was supposed to be where the community radio station is. And so, they're still raising money and still trying to complete that project. And the folks at APM said, well, they have a capital campaign so far. They've raised a lot of money, but the timeline really depends on the fundraising and how quickly that they could, raise the funds necessary. I believe they need another $5 million. So hopefully they can find some donors and supporters to invest in that project. But I too, Denise, have high hopes for the Uptown Theater. And we all have seen the way that the Met has been restored as well on Broad Street, and all the incredible acts that they've been able to bring to Philadelphia as a result. So we'll keep an eye on it and hopefully report back at a later time on its grand opening.
And, these things are really important because if we're going to talk about Philadelphia as a city of neighborhoods, which is what we hear all the time, you have to preserve those neighborhoods and some of those iconic areas within those neighborhoods. So it's really good to see it and really important to see it. So we will be back next week on Hall Monitor. There's a lot going on. A lot is going to continue to go on, not least of which is the first day of City Council, which will be September 11th this year. This time next week will be September. So we're already back in the full swing of things. There's a lot going on. So you'll see us next week and for a really long time here on Hall Monitor. So have a good night, everybody.